I am Ophelia Lake, 30 years old, from a quiet town in South Carolina. The night my heart finally cracked wasn't a stormy one. It was perfectly clear. The kind of evening where you can hear cicadas hum through the thick, humid air, where families gather on porches and laughter spills through screen doors. But not mine. Not that night, because that was the night my parents hosted a family dinner and didn't invite me. I remember standing across the street from our white-paneled house, the one with the magnolia tree out front, watching the golden light flicker through the curtains. My mother's laugh, that high, proud sound, carried across the yard. I could hear the clinking of glasses, my father's voice booming, "To family! Family!" I froze there on the sidewalk, groceries still in my hands. Inside, their cars filled the driveway, my brothers, my sisters, even my aunt's old blue sedan. Everyone was there, except me. For a moment, I told myself there must have been a mistake. Maybe they forgot. Maybe I missed a text. I dug through my phone, hands trembling, but there was nothing. No message, no call. That realization hit like cold rain down my back. I stood there far too long, watching silhouettes move through the window. My father pouring wine. My brother cracking jokes. My mother smiling the smile she only saved for others. And then, through the curtain gap, I saw it. A long, polished oak table gleaming beneath the chandelier. Dishes I'd helped prepare since I was little. Her honey-glazed ham, my grandmother's casserole, and the lemon pie that used to be my job to bake. Only now, my younger sister Lydia was serving it, laughing, radiant, in the seat that used to be mine. My stomach twisted. I wanted to march in and demand answers, but I couldn't move. I just stood there, numb, as laughter drifted through the open windows, like music from another world. That was the night I realized something brutal. You can love your family deeply, but sometimes they've already decided not to love you back. I walked home in silence. My apartment was small. One bedroom, thin walls, the kind of place you could hear your neighbor's TV through. I sat on my couch, still holding the grocery bag. The milk inside was warm, the bread crushed. I don't even remember setting it down. Tears burned behind my eyes, but I refused to cry. Not yet. Because when you've been ignored your whole life, humiliation doesn't break you right away. It seeps in slowly, like water under a locked door. Have you ever experienced this kind of betrayal? Share your story in the comments, and subscribe if you believe no one should be treated this way. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, replaying every moment leading up to it. Maybe it had been my fault. Maybe I'd done something wrong. But the truth was clearer than ever. They'd been pushing me out for years. I just hadn't wanted to see it. It started after Lydia got married. My parents began introducing her as their golden child. They bragged about her new house, her husband's business, her perfect little life. Whenever I'd visit, my father would say things like, "You'll get there one day, Ophi," with that pitying smile that made my chest tighten. My mother, always careful with her words, would add, "You're just different. Not everyone's meant to settle down. Different." That word stung worse than any insult. I worked hard. 2 jobs, long hours, saving every cent while they treated me like the family embarrassment. Because I wasn't married. Because I didn't have a degree that looked good on the wall. Because I chose art instead of accounting. They loved Lydia because she made them look good. And they tolerated me because they had to. Until that night. Until they didn't even pretend anymore. The next morning, I showed up at their house. The front door was still covered in leftover ribbons from the dinner party. Balloons deflated on the porch steps. My mother answered in her robe, startled. "Ophelia, what are you doing here?" I stared at her, my voice shaking. "You had dinner last night." Her eyes flicked to the side. "Oh, well, yes. Just a small gathering." "With everyone," I said, my throat tightening. "Everyone but me," she sighed like I was being dramatic. "We didn't think you'd want to come. You're always so busy, always tired. You don't exactly fit in with that crowd." That crowd. My own family. "Mom," I whispered. "I'm your daughter." "Yes," she said softly. almost apologetically. "And we love you. But Ophelia, you make things uncomfortable sometimes. You always have something to say, or you get emotional. We just wanted a calm night." Calm. Meaning a night without me. My chest tightened so hard I thought I'd stop breathing. Behind her, my father appeared, coffee mug in hand. "Ophi, don't start drama. It was just dinner." "Just dinner?" I repeated, voice breaking. "You toasted to family." He frowned. "You're overreacting. That's what they always said when they didn't want to face what they'd done." I turned to leave, but my mother's voice stopped me. "You could try harder, you know. If you weren't so defensive all the time, maybe things would be different." I froze. "Defensive?" "Yes," she said. "You always think we're against you. Maybe you need to look at why that is." Her words sliced through me like glass. I walked away without another word. That was the last time I saw them for years. That drive home, I cried so hard I could barely see the road. My whole body shook, with anger, shame, grief. But somewhere in those tears, something changed. Something inside me broke, but something else. Woke up. Because that night taught me what no one had ever said out loud. Sometimes family isn't where you come from. It's where you're going. And one day, I promised myself, they'd see exactly what they threw away. That dinner was supposed to be the moment they erased me, but it became the moment I began my story. People always say family love is unconditional, but I learned early that in my house, love had conditions, and I never seemed to meet them. After the dinner incident, memories I'd buried started clawing their way back up. Every conversation, every look, every tiny moment I'd brushed off as nothing. Now I saw them for what they were, little cracks in the foundation that had always been there, waiting to split wide open. When I was 8, I won a small art contest at school. My drawing of our old barn had gotten first place, and I came home clutching the certificate like it was gold. "Mom, Dad, look, I won." My mother had smiled politely, the way you do when a child shows you a crayon scribble. "That's nice, honey," she said, not looking up from her magazine. Then my father had asked, "Is there a prize?" "Money?" "No," I said, my voice small. "Just this." He nodded and turned back to the TV. A few minutes later, Lydia came in from softball practice, covered in dirt, but beaming. My parents jumped up, showering her with praise. "That's my girl. You're the star of the team." That was the first time I realized love in our house wasn't about effort. It was about spotlight. Growing up, Lydia was sunshine, popular, athletic, everything they could brag about. And me? I was the quiet one, the artsy kid who read too much and didn't fit their mold. They called me sensitive, emotional, too intense. But what they really meant was inconvenient. At family gatherings, they'd talk over me. At Christmas, they'd forget my gifts or hand me something clearly rewrapped from last year. Even at birthdays, Lydia's laughter always drowned out my voice. It didn't bother me at first. I thought that's just how families were. Some people shine brighter. But as I grew older, I began to feel like I wasn't just ignored. I was erased. By the time I hit high school, the divide was undeniable. Lydia was crowned homecoming queen. My parents threw her a huge party, balloons, banners. The whole town showed up. When I graduated a year later, I got a polite dinner at a diner. My dad clapped my shoulder and said, "Good job, Ophi. You'll find your path eventually." Eventually. It became his favorite word when it came to me. Eventually you'll figure out what to do. Eventually you'll get it together. As if my worth was always pending approval. Have you ever experienced this kind of betrayal? Share your story in the comments, and subscribe if you believe no one should be treated this way. When Lydia got engaged at 22, my parents acted like they'd just been crowned royalty. My mother went on and on about the wedding. "Our Lydia deserves the best." I helped with decorations, invitations, even the dress fittings. I smiled through it all because that's what I'd learned to do. Be useful, stay quiet, stay out of the way. But at the rehearsal dinner, something inside me broke a little. I overheard my father telling one of the guests, "We're so proud of Lydia. She's the success of this family. Always has been." And then he laughed. "Ophelia's still trying to figure herself out. You know how artists are. Dreamers. Dreamers. The word was drenched in condescension. That night, I went home and cried for hours. Not because of what he said, but because deep down I realized he was right. I was still trying to figure myself out. But what hurt most was that they never gave me the space to do it. After that, I started visiting less. Every call home felt obligatory. Every visit ended in comparison. Lydia just got a promotion. Lydia bought a new house. Lydia's expecting. And then, like clockwork, they'd glance at me and ask, "So, how's your little art thing going?" They never said it out loud, but I could feel it. Disappointment. The silent kind that lingers in the room long after the words fade. So I started shrinking, talking less, visiting rarely, because every interaction reminded me I was the wrong kind of daughter. But what they never knew was that while they were busy praising Lydia's picture-perfect life, I was fighting for mine. I worked nights at a diner, painting between shifts. I submitted my work to local galleries, and though most rejections came fast, a few didn't. Slowly, I started selling pieces. Enough to pay rent. Enough to feel like maybe, just maybe, I was building something that was mine. One night, I sent my mom a photo of my first exhibition poster. It was small, just a local art center, but it meant the world to me. She replied an hour later, "That's nice, honey. But did you hear Lydia's pregnant?" That text hit harder than any insult, because it reminded me exactly where I stood, at the edge of their attention, always out of focus. Years passed like that. I built my life quietly, while theirs kept revolving around Lydia's milestones. The baby. The new house. The second baby. Every time I showed up with gifts, with love, with hope that maybe this time they'd notice me too. But they didn't. Even when Lydia and her husband started having financial trouble, my parents bailed them out instantly, sold land, lent money, offered support. When I asked for a small loan once to cover an art supply shipment, my father said, "You need to stop living in fantasy. Ophi, be realistic, be realistic." It was his favorite insult. Then came the moment I'd never forget. The event that would lead directly to the dinner that broke me. It was my mother's 60th birthday, and I'd been planning a surprise for months, a hand-painted portrait of our family farmhouse. I spent nights layering colors, every brushstroke filled with love I shouldn't have still had. When I finally gave it to her, she unwrapped it, stared at it blankly, and said, "Oh, Ophelia. It's beautiful, but it doesn't really match the living room." Then she set it aside, not to admire it. Just aside, Lydia handed her a gold necklace right after, and my mother cried. Tears, hugs, photos. My painting sat in the corner, forgotten. That night, I drove home with an ache that settled deep in my chest. I didn't know it then, but that moment was the final rehearsal, the prelude to the night they'd have their perfect dinner without me, the night they'd erase me completely. I used to think being ignored was mercy. That silence was safer than cruelty. But I was wrong. Silence can bruise too. And when you've spent your life being unseen, one day, that invisibility turns into rage. That rage became my fire, and soon, they would feel its heat. There's a moment when pain stops being quiet, when it turns from ache to thunder. For years, I'd been the good daughter, the understanding one, the one who smiled through the sting. But everyone has a limit, and mine came the week after that family dinner I wasn't invited to. I remember waking up and realizing something strange. I wasn't sad anymore. I was angry. Not the kind of anger that burns hot and fast, but the kind that simmers low and steady, building pressure until it changes you. I went through my week like a ghost. At work, my coworkers laughed and talked about their weekend plans, and I smiled on cue. No one noticed how detached I felt. When you spend your life pretending, it becomes second nature. But that Thursday night, everything cracked. I was in the grocery store, the same one I'd stopped at before that dinner. I reached for a carton of eggs, and a woman nearby said, "Oh, you're one of the Lakes, aren't you? I saw your parents' pictures from the family dinner on Facebook." "Lovely evening," I froze. The photos were online. When I got home, I opened my phone, my hands trembling. There it was, post after post. My parents smiling, arms around Lydia and her husband. Laughter, candles, speeches. One caption read, "So blessed to have the whole family together." The whole family. I felt my heart drop into my stomach. I scrolled faster, each photo like a slap. Lydia's kids, my cousins, even my aunt, the one who used to call me her second daughter, everyone smiling. Everyone pretending I didn't exist. I don't remember throwing my phone across the room, but I remember the sound it made when it hit the wall. Sharp. Final. Then came the scream. Raw. From somewhere deep I didn't know existed. I sank to the floor, my breath breaking in gasps. How do you grieve people who are still alive? Because that's what it felt like. Grief. Not just for them, but for every version of myself that had begged for their love. Have you ever experienced this kind of betrayal? Share your story in the comments, and subscribe if you believe no one should be treated this way. When I woke the next morning, my eyes were swollen, my throat sore. I called in sick and stayed home. For the first time, I let myself really look at my life. The tiny apartment, the unfinished paintings stacked in corners, the emails I never answered, the parts of me I kept on hold waiting for their approval. I thought about every time I'd swallowed my words to keep the peace. Every time I'd told myself they didn't mean it. Every moment I'd smiled when I wanted to scream. And I realized something terrifying. I didn't even know who I was without their rejection. That's when I knew something had to change. That evening, Lydia called me. I stared at the screen for a long time before answering. "Hey, Ophi," she said, her tone too casual. "Mom mentioned you were upset about not being invited. You okay?" I laughed, I'm short, bitter. "You tell me, Lydia. How's it feel to be the chosen one?" She sighed. "Come on, don't start this." "It wasn't personal." "Not personal?" I snapped. "It's always been personal. My entire life has been a footnote to yours." "Ophelia, no." I interrupted, my voice trembling. "You don't get to say my name like that." You stood there smiling while they erased me. She went quiet. Then softly, "You've always been so dramatic." That word again, dramatic, the family's favorite weapon. I hung up without another word. That night, I packed a bag. I didn't know where I was going, but I knew I couldn't stay surrounded by the ghosts of their neglect. The paintings on my walls suddenly felt heavy, like witnesses to every silent heartbreak. I loaded them into my car, one by one, under the pale wash of moonlight. It wasn't running away. It was escape. I drove for hours, past the county line, past familiar exits. The road stretched endlessly beneath the hum of the tires. By dawn, I reached a small coastal town I'd visited once as a kid. Beaufort, with its slow tides and sleepy charm. I found a cheap rental above a bakery that smelled like cinnamon and salt. It was small, but it felt like a reset button. For the first time in years, I didn't have to be anyone's disappointment. The first few weeks were hard. Silence hit differently when it wasn't forced on me, when it was mine by choice. I painted through the nights, often with tears drying on my face. My hands shook, my strokes uneven, but the colors poured out like confession. One canvas in particular, a faceless woman standing outside a house glowing with light, felt like exorcism. It was me. When it was done, I stared at it for hours. Then I signed it, Ophelia Lake. For once, I didn't sign with shame. I got a part-time job at a local gallery soon after. The owner, a kind older woman named June, noticed my art when I showed her photos on my phone. "This," she said, pointing to the faceless woman, "feels like truth. People will connect to that." Her words hit something deep. Truth. Connection. Things I'd never been allowed to have. She offered to hang it in her next showcase. That night, I cried again, but this time it was relief. A few months passed, and slowly Beaufort began to feel like home. I made friends, real ones, people who didn't look through me, who laughed with me, not at me. I stopped checking my parents' Facebook. I stopped hoping for apologies that would never come. And somewhere in that stillness, I found something close to peace. But pain has a way of echoing, doesn't it? Because one morning I got a call from my mother. I almost didn't answer. "Ophelia?" Her voice cracked. "It's your father. He's been sick. Lydia's helping us with everything, but we could use you too." My heart clenched. Not from guilt, but from the realization that they only reached for me when they needed something. "Of course you could," I said quietly. "But I can't," she paused. "What do you mean you can't?" "We're family," I laughed softly. "Family doesn't forget you at the dinner table." And before she could say another word, I hung up. That call changed something. It wasn't defiance. It was closure. I had spent years begging for a seat at their table. But now I realized something far more powerful. I could build my own. That night, I hosted my own dinner. Just me, my new friends, and the hum of the sea outside the window. We ate, laughed, and toasted to new beginnings. As I raised my glass, I whispered to myself, to the girl they left outside the window. She made it inside, her own way, and for the first time in my life I meant it. Leaving isn't always about distance. Sometimes, it's about finally choosing yourself over the people who never did. I'd always thought of home as a place you returned to, a safety net, waiting in case the world became too heavy. But when your home is the weight, walking away is the only way to breathe. The night I decided not to go back, I stood on the small balcony of my rented room above the bakery in Beaufort, watching the harbor lights shimmer across the dark water. The salt air wrapped around me like a quiet reminder. I was free, and completely alone. Freedom is strange at first. It's heavy, because it comes with the realization that there's no one left to blame for your future but yourself. The first few weeks after cutting off contact with my parents were a blur of conflicting emotions. I missed them, or at least I missed the idea of them. The parents I'd always hoped they could become. But each time I reached for my phone, I remembered the dinner, the laughter, the word family echoing through the night like a cruel joke, and I'd put the phone back down. I threw myself into work at the gallery. June, the owner, treated me like an equal, not an employee. "You have something rare," she said one day, watching me hang a new canvas. "You paint like someone who's seen both heaven and hell, and lived to tell about it." I smiled faintly. "Maybe because I have," she chuckled softly. "Then make them both pay rent." That became my mantra. The more I painted, the more the bitterness transformed into something else. Clarity. Every brushstroke felt like therapy, every color a conversation I never got to have. I began to sell pieces regularly, mostly to tourists who loved the emotional realism, as they called it. They didn't know each painting carried a story, a scar. One night I stayed after hours, painting long past midnight. The gallery lights cast golden halos across the canvases. In one corner stood my favorite, the faceless woman from before. But now, I added something new. Hands. Her hands reaching out, not toward a house anymore, but toward the horizon. She wasn't begging to be let in. She was walking away. Have you ever experienced this kind of betrayal? Share your story in the comments, and subscribe if you believe no one should be treated this way. Months passed quietly. I built routines. I learned to enjoy solitude. Then one day, June approached me with a nervous smile. "Ophelia, how do you feel about exhibiting your own collection?" My heart stopped. "My own?" She nodded. "You've earned it. I've been showing your work to a few curators. They want to feature your art at the regional showcase next month." For a moment, I couldn't speak. The girl who once stood outside her own home, invisible to her family, was now being seen by strangers and celebrated. I hugged June tightly. "Thank you. Don't thank me," she said. "You did this yourself." That night I cried, not from sadness, but from the quiet shock of being valued. The weeks leading up to the exhibition were a blur of preparation, framing, titling, writing short descriptions for each piece. One painting stood out, the faceless woman with outstretched hands. I titled it, Leaving Home. As I wrote the description card, I paused over the last line. I wanted it to say something honest. Finally, I wrote, "Some doors don't close behind you. They lock to remind you never to go back." The night of the showcase was electric. The air buzzed with conversation and the scent of champagne. I wore a simple black dress, confident, composed, unrecognizable from the Ophelia who once cried outside her parents' window. When the guests began arriving, June guided me through the crowd, introducing me to collectors, journalists, and other artists. Cameras flashed. People murmured words like raw, real, and moving. For the first time in my life, people weren't just seeing me. They were seeing through me, straight into the story I had painted. Halfway through the night, a familiar voice froze me in place. "Ophelia?" I turned slowly. "Lydia." She stood there wearing a pearl necklace, and that same polished smile she'd inherited from our mother. "What are you doing here?" I asked, my voice low. She shrugged, pretending casual. "Mom saw a post about your exhibition online. She said I should come represent the family." I laughed under my breath. "Represent the family? That's rich." Her smile faltered. "Ophelia, please. They're proud of you, are they?" I said softly. "Or are they just shocked I made something of myself without their approval?" She looked down. "You've always thought the worst of them." I stepped closer. "No, Lydia. I just stopped pretending the worst wasn't real." Her eyes shimmered, and for a brief moment I thought I saw guilt. But then she straightened, fixing her perfect posture. "You're still so dramatic," I smiled thinly, "and you're still their echo." After she left, I stood by the painting of Leaving Home, watching strangers study it with quiet awe. One woman turned to me and said, "This piece, it feels like freedom." I nodded. "It is, because that's what leaving really was. Not escape. Not rebellion. Freedom." Later that night, after the event ended and the last guests had gone, I stayed behind, barefoot on the gallery floor. June came up beside me, holding 2 glasses of wine. "To new beginnings," she said, handing me one. "To freedom," I replied. She smiled. "And to family, the kind you choose." Her words hit me harder than I expected. Because she was right. The people in that gallery, June, my colleagues, the friends who showed up to cheer for me, they were my real family. The kind who didn't demand perfection. The kind who showed up without conditions. That night, I went home to my little apartment by the sea. I took off my shoes, sat on the floor, and watched the moonlight spill across the walls. My phone buzzed once. A message from an unknown number. "Your art is all over social media. Mom and Dad are showing everyone your pictures. They're saying how proud they are. Lydia." I stared at the screen, then laughed quietly. Of course they were proud, now that the world was watching, but they didn't understand. This success wasn't theirs to celebrate. It was built on every moment they made me feel small. They had given me rejection. I had turned it into recognition. Before bed, I took one last look at my painting of the woman walking away. She looked free, untouchable. And for the first time in my life, I saw myself in her completely. As I turned off the light, I whispered into the quiet. Maybe some homes are meant to be left behind, so we can finally build our own. Silence has weight. It's not empty. It's full of everything left unsaid. After the exhibition, I fell into a rhythm that felt almost sacred. My days were filled with light, the kind that came through paint-streaked windows and smelled like turpentine and ocean salt. For the first time in years, I wasn't chasing approval. I was creating from peace, not pain. And for a while, that was enough. My work caught the attention of a larger gallery in Charleston. They invited me to submit a full collection for a summer showcase. June nearly screamed when I told her. "Do you realize what this means, Ophelia? You're stepping into the big leagues." I smiled, half in disbelief. "I guess the world got tired of ignoring me." She squeezed my hand. "No, the world just needed time to catch up." That night, I walked along the pier alone, watching the lights flicker over the water. I should have been ecstatic, But deep down, something restless stirred. Because success doesn't erase old wounds. It just exposes where they still ache. The following weeks were quiet, almost too quiet. I hadn't heard from my family since the night Lydia appeared at my show. At first, I thought the silence was mercy. Finally, no more guilt, no more comparisons. But silence has a way of echoing, of making you wonder what's happening on the other side. I didn't check their social media for months. Then one morning, curiosity betrayed me. The first thing I saw was a picture of Lydia and her husband standing outside my parents' house, a for sale sign planted in the yard. My heart skipped. They were selling the house. The same house where I'd stood outside that night, watching them toast to family. The caption under the photo read, "New beginnings for the Lakes. Moving closer to the city for a fresh chapter." I almost laughed. Because if there's one thing my parents loved, it was pretending everything was perfect, even when it was falling apart. Have you ever experienced this kind of betrayal? Share your story in the comments, and subscribe if you believe. No one should be treated this way. I found out the truth a week later from a mutual acquaintance, an old neighbor, who came to one of my shows. "Your father's business went under," she said gently. "Something about bad investments. They lost a lot. Had to downsize." I nodded, expression calm, though my stomach twisted. "They'll land on their feet," I said quietly. She smiled sympathetically. "I'm sure they will. Your mother mentioned how proud she is of you, though. Says you're famous now. Famous. I wasn't famous. I was finally seen. There's a difference, but the irony wasn't lost on me. The people who once couldn't bear to be associated with my little art thing were now using my name like a badge of pride. In the months that followed, I worked harder than ever. The Charleston Showcase became my most ambitious project yet. 20 new pieces, each one more personal than the last. But beneath the beauty, there was rage. Not wild or vengeful, but sharpened into control. Every color carried memory. Every shadow hid a scar. I titled the collection, Echoes of the Unseen. At the opening, critics called it hauntingly human. One reviewer wrote, "Lake's art feels like confession painted in sunlight, pain that learned how to breathe." I read that line over and over. It felt like someone had finally translated my silence into words. After the show, the gallery hosted a dinner. I sat across from curators, investors, and journalists, all eager to talk about meaning and inspiration. But halfway through the evening, my phone buzzed. A message from an unknown number. It's Mom. "I know you probably don't want to hear from me, but things haven't been easy. Your father's health isn't great. We're trying to get back on our feet. I'm proud of you, even if I never said it enough." I stared at the screen for a long time. My hands didn't shake. My eyes didn't sting. I just felt hollow. For years, I'd fantasized about that message, about the day they'd finally reach out. But now that it was here, I realized how late it was. Pride without presence is just guilt in disguise. I didn't reply. Not out of cruelty, but because some doors, once closed, are meant to stay that way. Still, the silence afterward felt different, heavier, more final. There were moments when I'd catch myself wondering what they were eating for dinner. Whether my father still watched the news with his coffee. Whether my mother still wore her hair in that neat bun she'd never let me touch as a kid. But then I'd remind myself, they made their choices, and so did I. A few months later, I got an invitation in the mail, Lydia's son's birthday party. At first, I thought it was some kind of joke. But there it was, handwritten in my sister's looping script. "Would love for you to come, Ophi. It's been too long. Mom and Dad will be there. They miss you." I read it twice, then set it on my desk. Part of me wanted to go, to show them the woman they underestimated, the success story they'd tried to erase. But another part of me whispered, why feed them what they refused to nurture? In the end, I didn't go. Instead, I spent that evening in my studio, painting something new. A dinner table, elegant, candlelit, filled with faceless figures smiling toward an empty chair. The title, The Seat They Left Empty. It became one of my most talked about works. The months rolled by, and the silence between us grew into something almost sacred. I didn't hear from them again until a year later. Another letter from my mother. It wasn't handwritten this time. It was typed, cold, formal. Ophelia, we've had to move again. Your father isn't working, and Lydia has her own problems. We could use a little help. You've done so well for yourself. Surely you could spare something for family. Family. The word made me laugh out loud. I folded the letter neatly and slipped it into a drawer beside my first art contest certificate, the one they'd ignored. All those years ago, I didn't reply this time, either, because silence, I realized, can be an answer too. As the seasons changed, my art grew bolder, less about the pain, more about the power that came from surviving it. I bought my own small studio downtown, painted the walls the color of morning fog, and covered every inch with memories turned into masterpieces. People called me mysterious, reclusive, private. But the truth was simpler. I'd learned to love the quiet. The same quiet that once suffocated me had become my sanctuary. And while my parents' voices faded from my life, something else began to take their place. Self-respect. Because sometimes the loudest revenge isn't shouting, or exposing, or destroying. It's thriving so quietly that those who doubted you have to live with the sound of your peace. That was the long silence, not a pause before the next chapter, but the incubation of strength. And soon, the world would see what that silence had created, because my next collection wouldn't just tell my story, it would show theirs. When you've lived most of your life waiting for permission to exist, building something on your own feels almost rebellious. I used to think strength was loud, that it looked like confrontation or victory speeches. But it isn't. Strength is showing up every day when no one is clapping. It's deciding that the people who doubted you don't get to narrate your story anymore. After the letter from my mother, the one asking for money, something inside me hardened. I wasn't angry. I was done. Done being their fallback plan. Done being their shadow. Done mistaking survival for peace. The next morning, I sat at my kitchen table, staring at the soft light slipping through the blinds. I wrote down one line on a sticky note and stuck it to the wall above my desk. If they won't make room for you, build your own house. That sentence became my blueprint. I threw myself into my art with renewed fire. Every piece became bolder, more unapologetic. The faceless woman who once walked away from her glowing house now stood tall on mountaintops, surrounded by colors too bright for shame. My work evolved from sorrow to defiance. And people noticed. One morning, I received a call from a New York curator named Avery Hunt. Her voice was smooth and excited. "Ophelia Lake, the reclusive artist from Beaufort," she said, half laughing. "Your collection in Charleston moved me. I'm opening a new gallery in Manhattan. I'd love to feature you." For a moment, I thought it was a prank. "New York?" I whispered. "Yes," she said. "Your story, your art, it deserves a larger canvas." When I hung up, I just sat there in silence, my heart thundering. New York, the city of dreamers and doers. I smiled softly to myself. The girl who once begged for an invitation to dinner was now being invited to the table. Have you ever experienced this kind of betrayal? Share your story in the comments, and subscribe if you believe no one should be treated this way. Within a month, I was on a flight to Manhattan, my portfolio neatly packed, my heart oddly calm. The city swallowed me whole. Tall buildings like guardians of ambition, streets humming with people chasing something. Avery greeted me at her studio, a bright, open loft that smelled of paint and espresso. "Your work has voice," she said, studying one of my canvases. "Not everyone can paint emotion like this. You don't just show pain, you make it speak." Her words made something in me loosen. All my life, I'd been told I was too sensitive, too emotional. Now those same traits were being called power. Avery became more than a curator. She became a friend. She introduced me to art investors, magazine editors, and even a journalist from The New Yorker who wanted to feature my story. Each meeting felt like rewriting history. When the New York show finally opened, it was beyond anything I'd imagined. Cameras flashed. People lined up. A sea of strangers stood in front of my work, whispering words like brilliant, bold, transcendent. I wore a simple navy dress, clean, elegant. I didn't need to prove anything anymore. At the center of the exhibit stood my largest piece yet, a massive triptych titled Inheritance. It depicted a dinner table again, but this time the empty chair wasn't vacant. A woman, older, wiser, sat there, her hands folded calmly, her face visible at last. Me. The audience stood silent before it, some in tears. A reporter asked, "What inspired this piece?" I smiled. "Family," I said simply. "And what happens when you outgrow the version they made of you?" The feature in The New Yorker changed everything. Commissions poured in. My name started appearing in conversations I never thought I'd be part of. Galleries called. Collectors reached out. And with each passing week, I felt something incredible. Not arrogance, not pride, but freedom. For years, I'd defined myself by absence. The things I didn't have. The people who didn't love me. But now, I was defined by what I created, by what I chose to build. Then one evening, as I was packing up after a late gallery event, I saw an email pop up on my phone. The subject line read, "We saw your article." It was from my mother. The message was short. "Your father and I read about your success. We're proud, Ophelia. We always knew you'd do something special. Maybe now we can all start over." I stared at the words for a long time. They always knew. That was almost funny. They didn't know me at all. They'd seen my name in print and suddenly remembered I existed. Still, the ache inside me wasn't anger anymore. It was acceptance. I typed a response, paused, and deleted it. Then typed again. "I'm glad you're well, but I've already started over, without you." I hit send. It wasn't revenge. It was release. Back in Beaufort, June called me the next morning. "I saw the article," she said proudly. "Our girl made it to New York. You know, they'll come around one day," I smiled faintly. "Maybe, but I don't need them to anymore." She laughed softly. "That's when they always do." Months later, I returned to South Carolina for the first time in years. The gallery there had decided to hold a retrospective of my early works, the ones I'd painted in that small room above the bakery. As I walked through the exhibit, I felt the past all around me, the fear, the loneliness, the stubborn hope. When the local newspaper came to cover the event, their headline made me pause. "Local woman returns home a national success. Home." I rolled that word around in my mind. This place used to define me. Now it barely recognized me. After the event, I drove past my parents' old house. The one they'd sold. It was empty now. The windows dark, the lawn overgrown. For a moment, I parked across the street and just stared. The house looked smaller than I remembered. Less like a fortress and more like a cage. I didn't feel hate. I didn't feel sorrow. I just whispered, "Thank you." Because if they hadn't shut me out, I never would have walked into the world. That night, I sat by the beach, my toes sinking into the cool sand. The tide came in slow, steady, eternal. The sound of something bigger than pain. I realized then that I had built everything they told me I couldn't, and I had done it without asking for permission. I thought back to that little girl standing outside her family's dinner, unseen and unwanted. If she could see me now, she'd smile, because she finally got her seat, not at their table, but at her own. I took a deep breath, feeling the night air fill my lungs. This was my life now, my creation, my empire, my peace, and somewhere I knew the silence between me and my family was growing louder for them than it ever had for me. They'd taught me invisibility. I'd turned it into invincibility. Revenge doesn't always come with fire and fury. Sometimes it arrives quietly, in applause that echoes louder than all the laughter that once mocked you. It had been almost 3 years since that family dinner I wasn't invited to. 3 years since the version of me who begged for love had died. Now. I stood in the glass atrium of a New York gallery that bore my name, the Lake Studio. Avery had pushed me to open it, said it was time I built something permanent. "Your story deserves a home," she told me, and now it had one. Irony, I thought, was a funny thing. I finally had a house with light spilling from every window, and not a single person in my family had the keys. The grand opening night was packed. Cameras flashed. My art, once dismissed as a hobby, now sold for more than my father's annual salary back when his business still stood. "Ophelia Lake," a journalist said, extending a hand. "You've become a symbol of resilience. How does it feel to come this far?" I smiled softly. "It feels like closure." A small crowd nearby clapped at that line. Closure. The word tasted sweet on my tongue. I didn't know that just miles away. My parents were watching me on television. A new segment ran that evening titled, "From Rejection to Recognition: The Rise of Artist Ophelia Lake." Lydia told me later that our mother couldn't look away. She sat in silence, her wine untouched, while my father muttered something about luck and timing. But the truth, the one they could no longer deny, was that I had done it without them. 2 weeks later, I returned to South Carolina for a charity event organized by the Charleston Gallery that had first believed in me. The event's theme was Artists for Renewal. Funds raised would help restore struggling small businesses in the state, including, unknowingly, my father's old company. When I arrived, I noticed the guest list. My mother's name was on it. Lydia's too. For a moment, I considered leaving. But then I thought of all the years I'd spent avoiding them, and all the power that avoidance had given them. No, it was time they saw me, not as the girl they erased, but as the woman they built through their absence. Have you ever experienced this kind of betrayal? Share your story in the comments, and subscribe if you believe no one should be treated this way. The ballroom shimmered with soft golden light, filled with artists, donors, and the hum of polite conversation. I wore a white satin dress, clean lines, nothing flashy. The kind of quiet elegance that makes people turn and look twice. I spotted them across the room before they saw me. My mother, holding a glass of champagne she clearly couldn't afford, and my father grayer, smaller than I remembered. Lydia stood between them, looking restless, her smile stretched thin. When my name was announced, "Please welcome celebrated artist Ophelia Lake," the room broke into applause. Every head turned toward me. Including theirs, I walked past them slowly, each step deliberate, steady. My heels clicked like punctuation. Our eyes met, my mother's wide with disbelief, my father's with discomfort. Lydia's face flushed pink. "Thank you," I said at the podium, my voice calm. "When I first began painting, no one believed it would take me anywhere. But sometimes, the greatest masterpieces come from the places people refuse to see." I let the words hang. I didn't need to look at them. I could feel the silence settling around them like a mirror. After my speech, guests mingled. Music played and champagne flowed. Lydia approached first, clutching her clutch like a lifeline. "Ophelia," she breathed. "You were amazing tonight. Thank you." Her eyes darted nervously. "Mom and Dad wanted to come say hello, but they weren't sure if you'd—" "They can speak for themselves," I said. My tone even. She hesitated, then gestured behind her. My parents approached slowly, as if walking across thin ice. My mother spoke first. "You look beautiful, darling, darling," a word she'd never used when I was a child. "Thank you," I said. My father cleared his throat. "We're proud of you, Ophelia, truly." I tilted my head. "Proud?" He nodded stiffly. "Yes, you've made something of yourself. It's impressive." There it was again, that word. Something of yourself, as if I'd been nothing before. I smiled politely. "I'm glad you think so. I learned from the best, how to start from nothing." My mother's expression flickered. "We did what we could." "No," I said softly. "You did what you wanted." They stood frozen, unsure how to respond. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't cry. I didn't even feel anger anymore. That was the real revenge. their discomfort in the face of my composure. After a long silence, I said, "I hope you both find what you're looking for." "I already did." Then I walked away. Later that night, as the event ended, Lydia found me outside near the fountain. "You really hurt them," she said quietly. I looked up at the stars. "Did I? Or did they finally see what they did to me?" She sighed. "You've changed." "I had to," I said simply. "You don't survive otherwise," she hesitated. "You know they're struggling, right? The house dad's health." "I know," I said, "and I wish them peace. But their struggles aren't mine to fix," she frowned. "You sound cold." I met her eyes. "No, I sound healed." Weeks passed, and that event became the talk of the community. Articles, photos, interviews, my image everywhere. And in the middle of it all, whispers about how the lake's daughter had outgrown her roots. At first, I ignored them. But then one article in the local paper caught my attention. Former business owner Robert Lake struggles to rebuild after bankruptcy. While daughter's art empire flourishes, they'd used my success as the contrast to his downfall. The picture of my gallery opening sat beside a photo of my father outside his foreclosed office. It wasn't my doing, but it was karma's way of balancing the scales. For years, they'd treated me like a source of embarrassment. Now my name was the only one keeping theirs relevant. Avery called the next day, laughing softly. "Poetic, isn't it?" I didn't laugh. I just said no. It's justice. Because revenge wasn't about destroying them. It was about showing the world the truth. They'd disowned me in private. Now their shame was public, and I hadn't lifted a finger. That night, I stood before a new blank canvas. The colors waited, patient, like secrets I was finally ready to tell. I dipped my brush into crimson and began to paint. A table, a family, and a woman walking away with a torch in her hand, lighting her own path. The title came to me instantly, The Feast of Consequences. When I stepped back to look at it, I smiled, not cruelly, not triumphantly, just knowingly. Because the first glimpse of revenge isn't fury, it's freedom. The freedom to stop caring whether they ever understand the pain they caused, because you already turned it into power. You never really plan the moment when justice arrives. It doesn't knock politely. It crashes through the door you once begged to be opened. By the time my second New York exhibition launched, my name had become something of a phenomenon. Time magazine ran a feature calling me the artist who turned rejection into renaissance. It was surreal, reading about myself like I was a character in someone else's novel. But success has a strange gravity. It pulls attention from the people who once turned away, and soon, even the ones who had erased me could no longer ignore me. The collection was called House of Echoes. Every painting told a story of silence, exclusion, and redemption. One piece stood out, a massive canvas that depicted a glowing dinner table surrounded by shadowy figures. At the head of the table sat a woman, visible, radiant, with her back turned to the others. I called it The Uninvited. Critics praised it as a masterpiece of emotional reclamation. They didn't know it was my family's story in paint. Every brushstroke carried their names without needing to spell them. On opening night, the gallery was overflowing. Press, collectors, celebrities, the kind of crowd that once felt like a fantasy. I stood beside Avery, who whispered, "You've made it, Ophelia. This is your legacy," I smiled faintly. "Not legacy," I said. "Reckoning, because that's what this was. Not revenge through cruelty, but through truth." A week after the show, my assistant forwarded me an email. Subject line, "A request for an interview." The sender? The Charleston Herald. The same paper that once ran an article mocking local dreamers who never make it. The same one that used to feature my sister's charity dinners and my parents' business awards. Now, they wanted me on the front page. "Poetic, isn't it?" Avery said, grinning. I nodded slowly. "Very." We scheduled the interview for the following week. Have you ever experienced this kind of betrayal? Share your story in the comments. And subscribe if you believe no one should be treated this way. When the reporter arrived at my studio, I noticed her eyes widen at the sight of the uninvited hanging on the main wall. "That's powerful," she said softly. "Is it autobiographical?" I smiled. "Aren't they all?" She hesitated. "Some people in your hometown believe it's about your family." "Then they must see themselves in it," I said, calm as ever. Her cheeks flushed. "Would you like to respond to their comments?" I shook my head. "I already have. The painting is my response." She looked at me with a kind of awe. "They say truth makes people uncomfortable. You've turned it into art." When the interview was published, it exploded online. The headline read, "Ophelia Lake paints her past, and South Carolina is finally listening." The article mentioned my parents by name, not because I did, but because people connected the dots. Everyone in Charleston knew the Lakes, the respectable family, the successful couple, the model citizens, until now. Within days, social media buzzed with whispers and outrage. "Is this the same family that disowned her? Can't believe they treated her that way. Look at her now." Her story's heartbreaking but inspiring. The more people talked, the more their facade cracked. A former neighbor commented under the article, "I remember that dinner. Ophelia wasn't there. Her mother said she was busy, but everyone knew that wasn't true." The comment section became a confessional booth. People from my past, old teachers, classmates, even Lydia's old friends, came forward with stories. Stories of favoritism, neglect, silence. The narrative they'd spent a lifetime controlling had unraveled, and I hadn't said a single word. Lydia called me one night, her voice tight with panic. "Ophelia, they're saying horrible things online. About Mom and Dad." "About us?" I was in my studio painting the reflection of firelight on glass. "Are they lies?" I asked quietly. She hesitated. "That's not the point." "It is," I said. "If it's true, then maybe it's time the truth stood in the light." "You're ruining our reputation," she snapped. I laughed softly. "No, Lydia, you ruined it years ago. The world's just catching up." She went silent for a long time before whispering, "They're falling apart, Ophi. Dad barely leaves the house. Mom cries every day." For a moment, I felt a twinge of pity. Then I remembered the empty chair at their dinner table. "I cried too," I said, "just not where anyone could see." And I hung up. A few days later, I received another letter. It wasn't typed this time. It was handwritten, shaky, smudged with tears. "Ophelia, you've made your point. The whole town is talking. We're sorry for the dinner, for everything. Please stop this. We can't bear the shame." "Mom," I stared at it for a long time. Shame. That was the word she used. Not regret, not remorse. Shame. The feeling of being seen for who they truly were. I folded the letter carefully and placed it in my scrapbook beside the article clipping. Justice doesn't always look like forgiveness. Sometimes it's just closure bound in paper. The media frenzy didn't stop. An art documentary reached out to film a short piece about my work. Avery encouraged it. "This is how your story lives beyond the canvas," she said. So I agreed. The day of filming, I stood before the uninvited as the cameras rolled. "When I painted this," I said slowly, "I wanted people to understand that exclusion has a sound. It's quiet, yes, but it echoes forever, until you answer it." The interviewer asked gently, "Do you think your family will ever understand?" I looked straight into the lens. "No, but they'll remember." The clip went viral. Millions watched. Comments flooded in. Stories from strangers around the world who'd been overlooked, underestimated, erased. I had become more than an artist. I was a mirror. One morning, I got an email from a teacher at my old high school. "We're adding your story to our curriculum on resilience. The students are inspired by you." I smiled. tears filling my eyes. The school that once forgot my name during an award ceremony now wanted to teach my story. Weeks later, a journalist asked if I'd ever reconcile with my family. I thought for a long moment before answering. Reconciliation requires equality, I said, and I stopped living beneath them a long time ago. That evening, I hosted a private dinner at my studio for Avery, June, and a few close friends. The table glowed with soft candles and laughter. As I poured wine, Avery raised her glass. To the woman who taught us that silence can scream. Everyone clinked glasses. I smiled, my heart full. Because this time, I wasn't the one left outside looking in. This table, these people, this love was mine. Earned. Chosen. Built from the ashes of being unwanted. Outside, the city lights blinked like applause. And somewhere, I imagined my family seeing me on TV again. Their daughter who no longer needed their pride because she'd built her own legacy out of their neglect. Public reckoning had never tasted so calm. Because the greatest revenge isn't in destroying your enemies. It's in watching them destroy their own illusions while you sit in peace. There's an odd silence that follows victory. Not the kind filled with peace, but the kind that hums with unanswered questions. When the noise of public attention faded and the applause stopped echoing through my phone, I was left alone in my studio with the one thing I'd always craved: quiet. But this quiet was different. It wasn't the suffocating silence of being ignored. It was the heavy kind, the silence that follows after you finally get what you thought you wanted. Months passed since The Uninvited went viral. My gallery flourished. My name became shorthand for poetic justice in the art world. But with each new headline, I found myself staring at that painting a little longer. People saw courage and catharsis in it. What I saw was grief frozen in color. Every time I looked at the woman's back, her posture, her stillness, I wondered if she felt as free as everyone assumed she did. Because I didn't. One rainy afternoon, I was cleaning the gallery when Avery stopped by with coffee and her usual spark of energy. "Still brooding over the painting?" she teased. I smiled faintly. "Always." She tilted her head. "You've achieved everything you dreamed of. What's left to think about?" I hesitated before saying, "What it cost." Her expression softened. The quiet consequence." "Yeah," I said. "The part no one claps for." She sipped her drink, thoughtful. "You didn't destroy them, Ophelia. You just told the truth. The rest was theirs to face." I nodded, but her words didn't quite settle. Because deep down, I wasn't sure if I wanted destruction or understanding, and which one hurt more to live without. Later that night, I walked through the city alone. The rain made the streets glisten, reflections shimmering like ghostly brushstrokes. I passed a restaurant window and froze. Inside, a family was eating dinner, parents laughing, a little girl twirling spaghetti, everyone smiling at the same rhythm. My heart clenched, not with envy, but with a hollow kind of longing. I'd painted so many versions of that table, haunted it, dissected it, avenged it, but I'd never truly sat at one that felt like home. Have you ever experienced this kind of betrayal? Share your story in the comments, and subscribe if you believe no one should be treated this way. The next morning, I received an unexpected email. Subject line: "We're in New York." It was from Lydia. "Mom wanted me to reach out. We're here for a few days. Dad's health isn't good. She keeps saying she'd like to see you. Even for a minute." For a long time, I just stared at it. The part of me that had fought so hard for distance immediately wanted to hit delete. But another part, the one that still remembered bedtime stories and Christmas mornings, hesitated. Maybe closure wasn't about refusing to look back. Maybe it was about being strong enough to look back and not break. I typed 3 words. "Where are you?" We met at a small cafe in the West Village. I arrived early, but when they walked in, time slowed. My mother looked older, her once perfect posture now slightly bent. My father leaned heavily on a cane. Lydia hovered behind them, her expression tense. They spotted me instantly. My mother gasped softly. "Ophelia." I stood up, every emotion, love, hate, confusion, fighting for space in my chest. "Hi, Mom." "Dad?" She smiled shakily. "You look wonderful." I nodded. "You look different." We sat. The silence between us felt as thick as paint left too long to dry. Finally, my mother spoke. "We saw the documentary, the article, everything." I waited. "It was painful," she said. "But it opened our eyes. I think we really hurt you." "You did," I said softly. "For a long time." My father cleared his throat. "We didn't mean to—" "Intent doesn't erase impact," I interrupted gently. He looked down. "You sound just like your mother when she's right." For the first time in years, a small, genuine smile tugged at my lips. We talked for hours. About their mistakes, about my life, about the silence that became our inheritance. My mother cried quietly. Lydia kept apologizing, over and over, until I finally reached across the table and squeezed her hand. "Lydia," I said, "we can't rewrite it, but we can stop rereading it." She nodded through tears. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet, but it was the beginning of peace. After they left, I sat in the empty cafe, watching the rain streak the windows. I should have felt lighter. But grief doesn't leave just because you've confronted it. It lingers, changing shape. For years, I'd defined myself against them. The girl they excluded, the woman they underestimated. But now, if they weren't the villains anymore, who was I? That question stayed with me. That night, I went to the gallery. I turned off the lights and stood in front of the uninvited. The painted woman, once radiant in defiance, suddenly looked lonely. Her back straight, but her shoulders heavy, like she carried not triumph, but truth. I touched the canvas lightly, my voice a whisper. "We made it, didn't we? But it still hurts." And in that moment, I realized something. Revenge doesn't heal you. It just clears the noise so you can finally hear your wounds. Days later, I began painting again. Something new, softer. The colors were warmer this time, the strokes gentler. I painted not what I'd lost, but what I'd learned. When I finished, the image took my breath away. A woman sitting at a table, surrounded not by shadows or ghosts, but by light. Not family by blood, but by choice, or friends, mentors. Faces of love freely given. The title came easily, Homecoming. It was the first painting I'd ever made without anger in my heart. When the piece debuted, it didn't spark headlines or controversy, but to me it was the most important work I'd ever done, because it wasn't a statement of revenge anymore. It was a declaration of peace. One evening, as I closed the gallery, I received a message from Lydia. "Dad passed away this morning. Peacefully. He asked about you." I sat down, the words sinking in like waves. There were no tears, just a quiet ache. Then another message came through. "Mom said she's proud of you." For real this time. I stared at the screen, then whispered, "I know," because for once, I didn't need to hear it to believe it. That night, I stood on my balcony overlooking the city, the lights twinkling like scattered memories. I thought of everything I'd lost and everything I'd gained. The girl I'd been, the woman I'd become. And though there was sorrow, there was also gratitude. Because pain had sculpted me. Silence had taught me, and even regret I realized, could coexist with peace. The truth is, not all stories of revenge end with fireworks. Some end with a deep breath, and the simple relief of finally being free. People think closure comes when others apologize. But real closure comes when you stop waiting for it. It had been months since my father's passing. The funeral came and went quietly. I didn't attend. Lydia sent me photos, messages, even a voicemail saying Mom kept looking toward the door, as if expecting me to walk in. I didn't. Not out of cruelty, but because I'd already said my goodbyes years ago, to the version of them I used to need. Still, that night, I lit a single candle in my studio and whispered, "Rest, Dad." The flame flickered once, like acknowledgement, and then I moved on. Life slowed down after that. My gallery still thrived, but I began taking fewer commissions. The chaos of success had started to feel less like freedom and more like noise. So I moved again, this time to a quiet coastal town in Maine. A house with tall windows, sea wind in the curtains, and an old oak tree that leaned like it was listening. I called it Solace House. It was the kind of home I used to imagine as a child, not grand or crowded, just peaceful. A place where I didn't have to earn belonging. One morning, while unpacking, I found an old sketchbook buried under a pile of canvases. Its cover was torn, the pages yellowed. Inside were my earliest drawings. Shaky, clumsy, full of hope. One sketch stopped me cold. It was of a dinner table. My family, everyone smiling. And me, drawn smaller, at the corner, half erased. I traced the faded pencil lines with my fingers and whispered, "You don't have to sit there anymore." Then I tore out the page, walked to the shoreline and let the wind take it. It danced above the waves for a moment, before disappearing into the sea. That was the last piece of the past I ever released. A few weeks later, June called from Beaufort. "Your mother came by the gallery today," she said gently. She looked frail. "She asked me to give you something." I froze. "What?" "A letter." She mailed it the next day. When it arrived, I stared at it for hours before opening it. The handwriting was uneven, shaky. "My dearest Ophelia, I don't know where to begin. You were right. We wanted control, not connection. I thought love meant perfection. You taught me that love is letting people be who they are, not who you wish they'd become. I've watched you become everything I couldn't be. Brave, honest, free. I'm sorry it took losing you to see that. If we never meet again, know that I am proud of you. Not for your success, but for your peace. Love always, Mom." By the time I finished reading, tears had blurred the ink. It wasn't redemption, but it was real. I folded the letter carefully, placed it beside my father's photo, and whispered, "You both finally saw me." That night, I couldn't sleep. I walked to the beach barefoot, the sand cool beneath my feet. The ocean murmured like an old friend. As I stood there under the moonlight, I thought about the journey, how pain had been my compass for so long. Now, standing in the calm, I realized something. I wasn't defined by what they did to me. I was defined by how I survived it. And survival, when done with grace, becomes art. Have you ever experienced this kind of betrayal? Share your story in the comments, and subscribe if you believe no one should be treated this way. Months later, I decided to paint one last piece. Not for a gallery, not for sale. Just for me. The canvas stood taller than I was, blank and expectant. I stared at it for days before I finally touched the brush. When I began painting, I didn't think. I just moved. Soft blues for peace. Gold for resilience. White for forgiveness. Not theirs, but mine. And at the center, a woman standing by the sea, her back to the past, her face to the sunrise. No table, no shadows, no audience, just freedom. I titled it Final Voice. A year later, a small art magazine interviewed me in my main studio. The reporter asked, "If you could speak to your younger self, the girl who was left out, who was overlooked, what would you tell her?" I smiled. I'd tell her that one day she'll thank them for not inviting her. Because she was meant to build her own table. The reporter looked up from her notes. Do you forgive them? I took a long breath before answering. I forgive the parts of them that didn't know better. But I'll never forget the parts that did. She nodded, writing down every word. Before she left, she asked one last question. What's your definition of revenge? I thought about it, really thought. Then said, peace. That's the highest form of revenge. Because it's the one thing your enemies never expect you to find. That evening, after she left, I sat on the porch watching the sunset bleed into the horizon. The sky was a masterpiece no artist could ever replicate. I smiled, realizing that for the first time in my life there was nothing left to prove. No family to impress. No audience to win over. No ghosts left to chase. Just peace. Vast, quiet, earned. A week later, June sent me a photo. It was of my mother at the Beaufort Gallery, standing in front of one of my early paintings, the seat they left empty. She looked small but peaceful, her hand resting gently on the frame. She visits often, June wrote. She doesn't say much, but she always smiles. I didn't reply. I just sat with it, that strange, bittersweet symmetry. Life had a way of circling back, but this time it didn't hurt. It healed. That night, as I cleaned my brushes, I whispered aloud. Maybe to the ocean. Maybe to the girl I used to be. You did it. You survived being unseen long enough to see yourself. And for the first time, I didn't need to hear anyone else say it. And if my story resonated with you, please like, subscribe, and share it with someone who might need to hear that they too deserve respect and unconditional love. Because sometimes, the closure we seek from others is really the forgiveness we owe ourselves.